In 2016, Denis Villeneuve's Arrival was released, and despite the fact that the film is now 10 years old, the themes of the film have never been more relevant than they are today. The film tells the story of 12 alien ships reaching Earth, causing the corresponding 12 nations that they landed in to work together in order to figure out what the aliens are doing on planet Earth. The American military enlists expert linguist Dr. Louise Banks to decode the alien language, as well as communicate with the beings, if at all possible. There's a sense of urgency here because, hypothetically, any one of the nations could end up getting humans into an unneeded war with these highly advanced beings, which would be uncharted territory for humanity, obviously. It is Louise's mission to make sure that this does not happen. Across the course of the film, Louise works alongside scientist Ian Donnelly, and the duo form a bond, as they are the only ones on the restricted site that seem to want to actually learn about these creatures and make a real connection with them. Conversely, the American military has taken the opposite approach of Louise and Ian. That is to say, they assume that the beings are here on Earth to either learn about humanity or, as mentioned earlier, start a war with humans. This assumption held by the American military is based solely on their lack of understanding of the creatures, hence why Louise's expertise has been sought out by the more forgiving members of the American military during this extraordinarily tense situation. Still though, there is a real sense here that the militaries of each of these nations are preparing for an all-out war with these aliens when you compare how these militaries react to what they are perceiving as an invasion versus Louise and Ian's proactive attempts to make a connection with these beings. The film's overall message becomes quite clear, but I'll get more into that in just a bit. The military is doing their best to show restraint, despite the growing pressure from higher-ranking commanders to make first meaningful contact with the beings. In one scene, Colonel Weber questions Louise's strategy of communication with the aliens, believing that she is wasting the government's time and resources on her own personal curiosity for the aliens. The colonel believes she should just be able to ask the aliens why they are there, and they should just logistically be able to answer that question, but considering how the American military has had such little luck getting through to the aliens thus far, you'd think that this man would just shut up and let this linguist expert do her job. Anyway, she puts the man in his place, explaining that,
okay, this is where you want to get to, right? First, we need to make sure that they understand what a question is. Okay, the nature of a request for information along with the response. Then, we need to clarify the difference between a specific you and a collective you. We don't want to know why Joe Alien is here. We want to know why they all landed. And purpose requires an understanding of intent. We need to find out, do they make conscious choices, or is their motivation so instinctive that they don't understand a why question at all? And biggest of all, we need to have enough vocabulary with them that we understand their answer.
Okay. Stick to your list.
Ultimately, Colonel Weber learns to just let Louise do her thing and make her slow progress. Weber actually ends up being one of the more understanding military bodies in the film. Some of the lower-ranking officers are much more hot-headed than Weber is. This is evident when they planted a chest full of C4 explosives in the alien ship, hoping to blow the aliens to smithereens, putting the entire mission at risk and potentially angering the other 11 ships. Anyway though, I'm getting ahead of myself. Eventually, Louise is able to learn the alien language piece by piece. She does this by offering up the English word for whatever she's pointing to, hoping to learn what the heptapods would call that specific thing or idea. This is literally the basis for how anyone learns any language. Despite the pressure laid on her by the American military, there are a few key breakthroughs that Louise makes during this phase, which causes her bond with the creatures to grow, something that naturally makes sense if you actually know anything about language and communication. The more and more you learn about another being, topic, or situation, the more likely you are to sympathize and understand it. Louise is the only human depicted in the film that truly understands the heptapods and is actively trying to listen to their words. Well, I guess you could count Ian as well, because he's there, but he doesn't really do all that much, so I'm going to focus mostly on Louise here. The other humans are more anxious, confrontational, and pessimistic. Take those rogue officers I mentioned earlier. One of the guys that we get to know a smidge about during the middle section of the film, I'm just going to call him Big Eyes because there's just something in them that would likely be a red flag in the real world. Like, he's always just staring intensely into the camera or like into whatever he's looking at. Anyway, Big Eyes gets a call from whom we assume is his wife, Annie. and his newborn. The man's wife dramatically expresses her fear for the world her daughter is going to grow up in if these aliens do end up taking over. Add to that the fact that her own husband has been tasked with guarding this extraterrestrial ship that just randomly appeared in the sky a couple of weeks ago. This scene is absolutely crucial to understanding what the average human being thinks of this so-called invasion. Of course, a military wife with a newborn would be worried sick, especially given the fact that there have been no updates since these ships landed over what I presume to be a few months before this scene. The scene also explains exactly why the American military and government themselves are so scared. They haven't seen what Louise and Ian have seen. The average person doesn't have the exact tools that Louise and Ian have. And to be perfectly clear, I'm not talking about them not having the physical ability to speak to these aliens. I'm talking about the general public's growing fear and failure to see this situation as anything other than an invasion, thanks to the mainstream media's propaganda on the matter. In universe, this couple of months must have been a time of great confusion for the masses, evident by the conspiracy podcast shown in this brief clip.
First contact with whoever it is that is inside that thing, and who do we have running the show? The government. That's right, folks. The same government who ruined our healthcare and bankrupted our military. Look at these people. Most of them don't even have guns. We could be facing a full-scale invasion. We are falling asleep at the wheel, people. You know what I'm talking about? I know you do. One of the smartest thing we could do right now would be to give them a show of force. I'm talking about a shot across the bow.
When push comes to shove, Louise is forced to ask the big question on everyone's mind.
To God's purpose. Offer weapon.
The aliens' answer worries the government, and the military is instructed to keep the ship on lockdown. Louise believes that the aliens must have miscommunicated what they were trying to say. Things get even worse when China and a few other nations are said to have been threatened by the aliens over in those countries. But with no real communication between the nations at this stage, Louise believes that they cannot know for sure that the creatures mean Earth harm. During the final countdown to China's war with the aliens, Louise decides to disobey her superiors and hop in the ship again, despite a strict no-contact order. She communicates with the aliens, who have picked up on English, just as Louise has picked up on their written language. Louise learns from the aliens that they are not in fact trying to go to war with humans. Instead, they wish to gift the language to humanity, as it will help them perceive time non-linearly. In the same scene, Louise asks the beings why she's been daydreaming about a child, leading to the aliens dropping a very large twist on the film. You see, throughout the film, there were many flashes to different points in Louise's life, namely when she was raising her child. It's here that the scenes are actually revealed to be taking place in Louise's future instead of her past. According to the aliens' explanation of her visions, Louise will have a child that grows up to have a rare disease, presumably a form of cancer, but it's not confirmed. This disease eventually takes her child's life, and we originally believed that all of these scenes happening throughout the film were taking place in Louise's past. With the knowledge that learning this alien language can morph your sense of reality, Louise returns to the ground in order to share the message with the government, but they don't buy it. She calls the Chinese general on his personal phone number and convinces him to abandon Chinese war efforts. And after this act of heroism, the aliens officially leave Earth, allowing Louise to write a book on the alien language, helping others to understand and communicate more effectively. Louise eventually gets married to that scientist, Ian Donnelly, and together they have that child I previously mentioned. Current-day Louise can see the good times with her family coming in the future, which makes the inevitable ending of her marriage and the death of her child worth it in her mind, leading her to go through it all despite the circumstances. And that's where the film ends. As I mentioned before, one of the main lessons from the film reigns true today. Despite being 10 years old at this point, the film's message is as timeless as ever. The main conflict of the film arises because of humans' lack of empathy for the aliens. Aside from Louise and Ian, not many humans depicted in the film offer the aliens any kind of communication. The other humans only see the massive 12 ships in the sky and the squid-like creatures that inhabit them, which allows for the humans to jump to the conclusion that they are on Earth for something nefarious. It's this dichotomy between these two attitudes, the welcoming, curious, and gentle Louise, and the defensive, unpredictable, and small-minded American military that really shapes the film's core message. Jumping to conclusions as the Chinese and Russians did throughout the film without properly trying to keep learning about these creatures and what they're trying to do on Earth is what almost led to a possible war between the aliens and humans. It is because of Louise that the war is stopped, and therefore the film takes a strong anti-war stance as well. It definitely is deeper than that, though. I mentioned before that the film also upholds the idea that language can change one's worldview. The film not only floats this idea around to play with Louise's perception of time, but on a deeper level, it's Louise's willingness to come face to face with these magnificent beings that led to humanity being saved. The clear message here is that those with empathy will save us from war and destruction, and the opposite is true for those without any empathy, as showcased by the American military, whose driving force is purely self-interest. How will I be affected by this? What could happen if we do not strike first? Instead of trying to engage with the aliens, the American military, and the other nations as well, tried to force a conflict because they were scared one would break out anyway. This is what is called a preemptive strike, and is something that happens quite often in real life as well. In many ways, this film reflects our current reality to a T. In a post-COVID era, alt-right groups have taken center stage, and that's not to say that they've swung more centrist. No. Rather, they have become more mainstream. And part of the reason why this happened is, of course, the media and its ever-evolving attempts to push rage bait and propaganda online. The panic surrounding this alien invasion and the conspiracies that catch fire in-universe are straight out of something you'd see today online, in this new disinformation age. It's why the film's message is so important to our survival as an empathetic species. Because how can we begin to fully work together to make the world a better place for everyone if no one understands each other? I can't remember who said this off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure the quote goes, "Everything is a conspiracy if you don't understand what you are talking about." In other words, if you cannot simply disprove something with real evidence and a complete understanding of all of the facts, then you're just spreading folklore. A real-world example would be, I could come on here and claim that the Earth is flat, because I have never seen the Earth's natural curve from a plane. But to do that is to fundamentally misunderstand just how large the Earth is. I didn't have all the facts, and I made a false claim based on my level of understanding of the situation. I'd have to be in a spaceship exiting Earth's orbit to truly see Earth's spherical nature from space, and yes, this is a genuine argument that you will hear from flat earthers who basically only graduated high school and spend most of their time on Twitter engaging in rage bait all day. Anyway, back to my original point. This phenomenon can be seen in all kinds of discussions today, whether it be political psyops, media literacy discussions, or the simplest things like food science. Social media has led to a huge uptick in false information being spread in order for creators, companies, and grifters to sell you content, products, and political ideologies. I'm not going to delve too deeply into every single online grift of the current year, as I think this video would lose its focus and probably be about 6 hours, but just know that the future that Arrival was painting has truly come to fruition. And it's all because of this central theme of empathy being the backbone of every society. Some Americans making $100,000, $150,000, or even $200,000 a year don't even realize that they are closer to those below the poverty line than they are to Elon Musk or Bill Gates. This belief genuinely stems from the propaganda that we are force-fed in this country to believe that empathy is not an essential component to human existence, and that if we just pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and go to work every single day, we too can be like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, and that anybody who doesn't want to conform to the societal norms or can't conform to societal norms due to their identity or physical or mental well-being is just lazy, poor, and dirty. This middle class has genuinely been propagandized to believe that their white picket fence and 2.5 kids who never miss a Sunday at church make them better than the underclass. They walk past homeless people on the side of the street and ignore them. They wince at the idea of mental illness being talked about in any real way, and they pretend not to notice when the United States commits war crimes in other countries because that would force them to confront the very idea that they profit off of other people's suffering. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, this country has an empathy crisis. I don't know if there is a film out there today that has illustrated this crisis to the same degree as Arrival. The American military in this film represents the type of person in the real world that has completely removed themselves from the concept of empathy. Louise obviously represents the opposite, someone who is willing to understand and listen and sympathize with those either at a disadvantage or those who are commonly misunderstood. Obviously, I don't think that this film is genuinely making an argument that the aliens represent those in the lower class, but I just had to bring that up as an example that could easily be understood. You could apply what I'm saying to many different scenarios in the real world and have it still make sense. On a micro and macro scale, this country has an empathy problem, as I've said multiple times throughout this video. We no longer seem to care what happens to our neighbors. We no longer want to learn about our neighbors' lives and their troubles. We don't want to share the burden of what this world has come to, especially if we are not suffering to the same degree as others. Not to say we ever were a particularly empathetic country, it seems as if we've taken a large step backward, thanks to short form, easily digestible rage bait. This film came out during the peak of Obama optimism. Things were very different back then. We were just sort of reaching the point of this chronically online, rage-baited echo chamber hellscape that we're in today. Racism and sexism and homophobia definitely still all existed, but on the whole, it was embarrassing not to be perfectly politically correct back then. You were publicly mocked for doing anything out of turn. Nowadays, though, rage bait and shock value content take you to the moon in an algorithm-based political climate, and thus, a culture is born that reflects that. The non-linear format of this film has a very specific use here. The scenes from Louise's future tell us about Louise as a character. When the film first starts out, the depressing realization that this woman lost her child and has to continue to live her life despite it fills in our understanding of Louise's next couple scenes, which, as I mentioned before, actually take place beforehand. It's the way the film is edited and paced that preconditions us to believe that Louise is really struggling in these scenes with the loss of her child. In reality, though, she's struggling to understand what this child even has to do with her and why she continues to daydream about her. Watching the film back, it's totally obvious that the emotions playing out on Louise's face are less mournful and more so confused, if anything. Though on first watch, these nuances are not noticeable whatsoever, and I think that that's where the genius of this film lies. The ability to misdirect the audience based on previous events in the film is something that isn't easy to do whatsoever, but Denis does it masterfully here. And I realized while editing this video that I completely forgot to praise Amy Adams' portrayal of Dr. Louise Banks, so I just wanted to take the time to say that none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for Amy Adams' stellar performance here. I think it was definitely a combination of the writing here and Denis as director and Amy Adams, who was obviously the one acting all of this out. So props to Amy Adams for the really amazing subtle nuances that she brings to this performance. One of my favorite scenes in the film is Louise's realization that she is literally processing the future through the alien's written language. Despite the scene looking kinda shitty with the CGI hair, I think it's an incredibly well done twist that I genuinely did not see coming. The music crescendos in this moment, and it's such a perfect scene. The alien's gift to humanity is somewhat vague if you didn't pay attention to the first half of the film, when Louise challenges the military's decision to stop talking to the other nations. She dares to ask why they can't just come together to solve this 12-piece puzzle that they were given, but is scalded for doing so. The military is missing the point that the aliens are trying to make here. In fact, they're so stupid that they literally bring the question up and just ignore the answer that Louise provides. The 12 ships gave you the information necessary to come together to solve this problem. But because you humans were so fucking focused on this being a potential invasion, you missed the fact that this is literally a call to come together and evolve as a species. According to the aliens, the alien species will need humanity's help in 3,000 years or so, and without the humans being a united group, that cannot happen. This language is a gift to unite them. It's unclear what the aliens will need the humans for in 3,000 years, but it really doesn't matter to the story at hand. The film's first hour positions it as a sci-fi thriller on par with something like Alien, but the latter half truly solidifies this as something about so much more than just some regular apocalyptic alien film. It's a story about time and communication and empathy and how all of them interact with each other. It's also a story about loss, and that is a powerful part of this film as well. As I laid out in this essay, few films have subtly been able to explore this specific message that I think we could all benefit from learning. Just because you don't understand something does not mean that there is some big conspiracy out there. In a time that is so vehemently anti-education and pro-rage bait, it's important to remember that not everything you read on social media is true, and most of it is being shown to you to either sell you a narrative and politicize you against your neighbors so that you don't point the finger upward, but to your left and right. It's all being orchestrated perfectly so that you specifically will fight against people more like you than the billionaires and goddamn near trillionaires that rule over this godforsaken planet. Arrival uses all of its best storytelling techniques to create this gorgeous, timeless tale, and I think it's pretty remarkable that it was able to accomplish this through a sci-fi lens. Sci-fi films obviously do have political or philosophical messaging in them, but as I stated before, Arrival's message is very unconventional for a sci-fi film, if that makes any sense. A lot of sci-fi films tend to lean more towards the macro of it all. In most alien films, humans are separated from the aliens, and there is a clear distinction between what is good and what is evil. The films are typically flashy and out there with their world building. Arrival, on the other hand, chooses to ignore the theatrics and focus on simplicity, from its more grounded message and themes all the way down to the aesthetics of the film. Arrival is not like any sci-fi film I've ever watched. The pace is a lot slower than a lot of sci-fi films. This allows the film to focus a lot more on the smaller and more intimate parts of the story, like developing Louise's character and her relationship with her daughter in the future, without it feeling like it's out of place in what would have been a more generic sci-fi action film, if it had leaned more on scope and theatrics over its messaging. All of these choices are extremely deliberate by Denis and the writer of the original story, Ted Chiang, and I have to praise it for that because I don't think I've ever seen a sci-fi film that's made me feel so introspective after watching it.